For most of our time on Earth, we were not the dominant species. We were simply another kind of human. Others hunted these same forests. Others claimed these same caves. And they watched us, with eyes so familiar, yet not like ours. Some were stronger than us, some more adaptable, and some may have been more intelligent in ways we still struggle to understand. We walked the same lands at the same time as other humans. They were not monsters and not our inventions. They were real. And for over 99% of our existence, we were surrounded. Yet today, every familiar face, every city, every child, all come from just one species. So what happened to the rest of our family? We are not the only humans who ever lived. We are simply the only ones left. Their bones lie scattered across continents. Their DNA sleeps inside us, and their disappearance remains evolution's greatest mystery. Our search begins with a world filled with rivals.
For over 99% of human history, we shared this planet with rivals. And the terrifying truth is not that they disappeared, but that we did not even know they existed until it was already too late to understand who they were, what they wanted, or why they vanished from the world we inherited. Picture a vast ancient night, tens of thousands of years old, the wind howling across African grasslands and echoing through forests of Europe and frozen valleys of Siberia, where shadows move that look so much like us but were not us, where firelight reflected in eyes that belonged to different kinds of humans, hunters, survivors, dreamers, and killers who roamed beside us long before there were cities, before there were kings or countries or written words, back when the earth was enormous and humanity was small. A young Homo sapiens mother sneaks through the darkness, clutching her child close as she listens to distant branches crack and wonders if it is a lion, a hyena, or one of them, one of the others, those who grunt in a slightly different rhythm, whose heavy footsteps sink deeper into the mud, whose tools glint with a rougher, sharper design, whose faces look like memories from a nightmare of a world not meant for one species alone. And she knows instinctively, if they see her, if they smell her fear, she may not see the sunrise. This was the reality for our kind for nearly all of our existence because we were never alone, never the rulers of the earth, never destined for dominance, not yet. And for every campfire we ignited, there was another fire on a nearby ridge, another tribe of humans with different bones, different instincts, and different futures unfolding. Neanderthals with their powerful arms and cold-forged endurance, Denisovans who vanished into the mountains and became ghosts in our DNA, mysterious hobbits hiding among tropical forests of distant islands, and others, many others whose names we still do not know, whose faces were buried before we could ever imagine them. Imagine walking across a riverbed 150,000 years ago and spotting a footprint, human-like but broader, deeper, with a strange curvature in the toes, a silent warning that we shared the earth with cousins who might be friend or foe, rival or ally, but never irrelevant. Each species had its own destiny, its own strengths and weaknesses, its own way of battling against hunger, cold, predators, and the relentless cruelty of nature. Neanderthals mastered fire long before we spread across Eurasia, shaping spears and scraping hides in caves filled with art that would not be discovered for tens of thousands of years. Their voices deep and resonant, their gatherings filled with culture we once arrogantly assumed only we could possess. The Denisovans developed superhuman tolerance for high-altitude life, conquering the crushing thin air of the Tibetan Plateau while we would have gasped helplessly. And somewhere, deep underground, bones were being buried carefully by Homo naledi, a species with a brain the size of an orange, yet capable of sacred rituals, proving that intelligence is not a matter of brain volume, but a spark of something far more mysterious, something that connects intention, fear, love, and the haunting knowledge that life must be respected even in death. And we humans, Homo sapiens, were still unremarkable then, still struggling to survive droughts, plagues, and predators whose teeth gleam sharper than our best stone blades, still learning to communicate with the nuance of language that would one day conquer minds, form civilizations, and write stories like this one. Yet in those early days, we were one fragile species among many, not superior, not chosen, simply lucky enough to adapt a little faster, to learn a little quicker, to fear the dark just enough to survive the night. Scientists today search ancient caves and deserts for traces of our lost cousins, and every decade rewrites the story we once clung to, the false belief that humans evolved in a straight line from primitive to perfect. Because the truth is so much more tangled, a branching tree of experiments written by evolution where dozens of human versions sprouted, struggled, and almost triumphed. Some species evolved to withstand freezing winters, others to run tirelessly under a punishing sun, and some to climb, hide, or manipulate the environment with surprising craft. Yet all of them carried fire in their minds, a spark of humanity that pulsed behind their eyes, making them far more like us than we ever wished to admit. When our ancestors first encountered Neanderthals in Europe, they would have stared into faces shockingly familiar. Large noses, strong brows, muscular builds, and eyes that studied us not as animals but as equals. And even today, when forensic artists reconstruct the heads of Neanderthals, they look like people you might pass on a modern street. Broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, dressed perhaps in a fur cloak, but undeniably human. Their children laughed, they cared for their sick, and they buried those they loved with flowers and gifts to guide them into whatever afterlife they believed in, long before we developed similar traditions. And yet, for centuries we depicted them as brutish cavemen because accepting their humanity would threaten the comforting lie that we are special by design and not by chance. But chance changes everything. The climate shifted violently, ice advanced, prey vanished, and then competition arrived. Us. We brought sharper weapons, more efficient strategies, and most devastating of all, language that allowed ideas to spread faster than any mutation could form. A tactic discovered by one hunter could be taught to dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, turning innovation into a weapon more powerful than claws or muscle. And so slowly, relentlessly, Homo sapiens pushed outward from Africa like a tidal wave of bone and fire, colliding with species that had called Eurasia home long before we even existed. Sometimes we interbred, exchanging genes and fusing destinies, which is why millions of people today still carry Neanderthal DNA, an echo of a love story or a desperate act of survival lost in time. But sometimes we fought, and no one recorded those battles, no stories survived. Only empty caves and vanished fires remain as evidence that history is written not by winners, but by survivors.
Imagine a Neanderthal elder staring from a cliffside as his strong, ancient people dwindled, not knowing why the newcomers multiplied so quickly, or why the game was disappearing, or why disease spread like a curse. Only knowing that the world was changing faster than they could adapt, that the night sky now belonged to a species with a frightening gift for shaping the future. And while Neanderthals were facing their final days, other cousins were fading silently elsewhere. Tiny Homo floresiensis disappearing into jungle myths, Denisovans scattering their genetic legacy across Asia without leaving a single complete skeleton behind, and Homo naledi sealing the bodies of their dead deep inside labyrinthine caves where light could never reach. For most of human history, these were not mysteries. They were neighbors, competitors, threats, and even partners. And the world was filled with their footsteps, their fires, their voices calling out across valleys, their hearts beating with hope and fear just like ours. But now they are gone, wiped from existence so completely that, until recently, we did not even realize they had walked beside us at all. When the first Neanderthal skull was discovered in the 19th century, scientists were stunned, unwilling to believe that another intelligent human species had once existed. And even then, they assumed they were dim, primitive, inferior, because the idea of shared humanity was too uncomfortable, too destabilizing to our pride. But then, a tiny finger bone was found in Denisova cave in Siberia, a fragment too small to identify. Yet, when its DNA was sequenced, the shockwaves spread across the scientific world. This bone did not belong to us, nor to Neanderthals, but to an entirely new kind of human, one who had been living, thriving, and evolving in the shadows of prehistory without leaving enough clues for us to see until technology finally caught up. So, what happened to them? Why are we the only ones left standing? Some vanished because the climate betrayed them. Some because small population sizes made them vulnerable to disease and genetic collapse. Some because we absorbed them, their bloodline swallowed into our own. And some because we competed for the same food, the same land, the same future, and we were mercilessly good at winning. Our ancestors carried curiosity sharper than any spear, ambition hotter than any flame, and fear that pushed us to conquer rather than share. And now we look around and see no rivals, only ourselves, masters of a world once overflowing with human diversity. But if we learned about 3 lost human species in just the past 20 years, and if fossils keep emerging from caves, deserts, and ancient riverbeds, then we must face a chilling realization. This story is not finished, and episode 2 of our journey will reveal a secret deeper than bones, a genetic mystery that leads us into the dark heart of Siberia, where a single finger bone rewrote everything we thought we knew about who we are and who we once stood beside.
Deep beneath the icy mountains of Siberia, where winters crush the landscape under endless night and wind screams like angry ghosts, lies a cave that has guarded a secret for tens of thousands of years. A secret so strange that when it was finally uncovered, it shattered everything science thought it understood about the human story. The place is called Denisova Cave, and if you were to step inside right now, you would feel an eerie silence, a cold watchfulness, as if the shadows themselves remembered the beings who once called this darkness home. Beings whose existence we did not even suspect until the modern age. Because unlike Neanderthals, they left no iconic skulls, no dramatic cave paintings, no obvious footprints in the archaeological record. Only whispers, fragments, and ghosts hidden in our blood. Imagine the scene. Russian scientists carefully scraping sediment in a remote chamber when suddenly, among scattered bones of bison and wolves, a tiny fossil emerges from the dirt. A finger bone. Only a fragment, barely recognizable as human, not nearly enough to build a face or a body from, but when DNA was extracted from that insignificant scrap, the world changed because the code revealed something impossible, something shocking. This bone did not belong to Homo sapiens, nor to Neanderthals, but to a completely different kind of human. One that shared a common ancestor with Neanderthals, yet had evolved into its own formidable lineage, a hidden people who adapted to extreme environments we would struggle to survive, who forged the legacy not beneath the ground but within our very genome. These newly discovered humans were named Denisovans, and the more we look for them, the more unsettling the story becomes because although their bones are vanishingly rare, just a handful of teeth, a jawbone found high on the Tibetan plateau, and fragments still being uncovered, their DNA is alive inside millions of us today, especially among indigenous populations of Australia, Papua New Guinea, and parts of Southeast Asia, suggesting that Denisovans were not shadows lurking alone in caves, but widespread, successful, intelligent, and powerful, a species that thrived across Asia long before Homo sapiens staked their claim.
But here is where the mystery deepens like a cave tunnel descending into darkness. How did a species so widespread leave almost nothing behind? How did they dominate harsh climates and towering mountains, yet vanish so completely we almost never learned they existed at all? Their teeth were unnervingly large, built for a jaw with crushing power, and their skeletal remains, though few, suggest they were robust, built like warriors hardened by the ice. Imagine encountering one in the wild 50,000 years ago, taller than most Neanderthals, broader than us, eyes glinting in torchlight, skin hardened by the cold, hands capable of snapping a branch as thick as your wrist without effort, a human who looked at you not as prey, but as competition. Denisovans carried genetic adaptations we only wish we possessed. One mutation let them breathe at high altitudes as easily as we breathe at sea level, allowing them to rule the Himalayas where the air is too thin for ordinary humans to endure. They may have developed unique technologies suited for icy survival, weapons designed for mountainous hunts, strategies passed quietly among small but skilled bands of survivors, their camps tucked away where no predator or rival could easily find them. Yet for all their strength, they were invisible, not in life, but in history, because our world has nearly erased them, leaving only scattered fossils that force scientists to piece together a puzzle missing nearly all its pieces. And the picture that forms is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. These were not primal cavemen stumbling through evolution's trial and error. These were apex humans in their own right, conquerors of ice and stone, a lineage that might have risen to dominate the earth had fate or our ancestors not intervened. And so we must confront a chilling possibility. Perhaps Homo sapiens did not rise because we were extraordinary, but simply because our rivals disappeared at the wrong time, under the wrong conditions, or encountered the wrong enemies. Genetic evidence shows interbreeding. Our ancestors and Denisovans met, loved, fought, merged their destinies in moonlit encounters nobody recorded. But the Denisovans eventually faded like a flame smothered by wind, and the question torments scientists. What force extinguished the people so perfectly adapted to survival? Was it climate chaos, shrinking food sources, or the expansion of Homo sapiens, armed with innovation, language, and relentless ambition, sweeping across a continent like a storm that left no space for alternative futures? And if the Denisovans once thrived across Asia, leaving offspring and legends in their wake, could there still be hidden caves filled with tools, art, or even preserved bodies waiting to be discovered, waiting to reveal a deeper truth that history has buried? Indigenous stories across Oceania speak of giant humans with immense strength, protectors or predators lurking in mountains and forests, myths that may not be myths at all, but fading memories of encounters alive in cultural DNA. And if so, then Denisovans are not merely fossils, they are echoes of alliances and conflicts that shaped who we are. Because the blood of these ghosts flow through millions alive today, granting endurance, superhuman oxygen efficiency, and immune defenses forged by ancient struggles we can only imagine. Perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this: Denisovans may not have lost to us in battle, but instead were absorbed so thoroughly that they live invisibly inside the victors, erased as a species yet alive as a legacy, a reminder that extinction is sometimes just camouflage. In the end, Denisova Cave is not only a burial site for forgotten bones, it is a tomb for an entire branch of humanity we are only beginning to resurrect through science. And as we uncover more from the ice, more fragments, more genetic clues, we must prepare ourselves for revelations that could rewrite our identity once again. Because if a single tiny finger bone could expose an entire lost human species, what else lies buried in the world's unexplored caves, especially those far from Siberia, beneath jungles where another strange human species once thrived, a species that's so small and mysterious that even their legends still whisper in the trees. And that is where our journey leads next, to an island of darkness and myth where little forest people hunted elephants no larger than dogs, and where science and folklore collide.
On a humid island deep within Indonesia's endless chain of emerald forests, where ancient volcanoes rise like sleeping giants from the sea and thick vines conceal secrets older than myth, the ground remembers footsteps so small that most would mistake them for a child's, yet they belong to a human species that could survive where giants fell, tiny but fierce, clever yet mysterious, and for tens of thousands of years they ruled their own hidden world. The island is called Flores, and if you were to trek its rainforest today, the air heavy with buzzing insects and the distant cries of unseen animals, you might feel the uncanny sensation that eyes are watching from the darkness, as if the legends whispered by villagers, the ones about little forest people, were not merely folklore, but memories of neighbors whose existence blurred the line between myth and evolution. Because beneath the earth of Flores, in a cave known as Liang Bua, scientists unearthed the skull so small it challenged everything we assumed about intelligence and survival. A human with a brain barely the size of a grapefruit, a stature around 3.5 feet tall, yet possessing stone tools sharper and more advanced than expected from such a tiny frame. A paradox of evolution, now known as Homo floresiensis, or informally, the Hobbit people, though Tolkien's creation feels too whimsical for beings whose lives were a constant struggle against nature's harsh tides. Imagine one of them now, a hunter creeping through damp vegetation, balancing a sharpened stone blade in hand, eyes scanning for movement among the trees, not searching for birds or rabbits, but stalking a far stranger prey. Pygmy elephants, known as stegodons, trunked creatures no larger than a cow, yet still formidable when cornered. And the little hunters coordinated, surrounding their quarry under the glow of torches and the rustling of palm fronds, courage burning bright and bodies small enough to hide behind a single boulder. Brain size should have limited them, but the hobbits defied every rule in the biological book, crafting fire, cooking meat, shaping weapons, organizing hunts, and perhaps even weaving stories that kept their kind united on a world within a world. Because island evolution had sculpted them differently, shrinking their bodies to match the limited resources of Flores while sharpening their instincts into survival tools more effective than brawn or height. But their story only becomes stranger when we look into their bones, which show features far more ancient than expected, echoing humans from nearly 2 million years ago, making scientists wonder whether these hobbits descended from the earliest adventurers of humanity, perhaps even Homo erectus or an older ancestor, who braved oceans we once believed no primitive human could cross. Yet here lies undeniable proof that someone did, long before sapiens built ships or dreamed of exploration. And so the mystery grows. How did such small humans reach this remote island, cut off by dangerous currents and deep seas? Did they build boats, or were they cast ashore by storms, shipwrecked and forced to evolve into something new, something stranger? The island shaped them into a world apart, where giant storks hunted them from above, and giant lizards, ancestors of today's Komodo dragons, stalked them on silent claws, making every moment a gamble of life or death. A miniature Earth where evolution played a wild experiment, testing whether intelligence could flourish in tiny form. And here is where the haunting part of the tale rises from the shadows. The fossils of Homo floresiensis suggest they lived until only about 50,000 years ago, meaning they shared this planet with early Homo sapiens. But some evidence, both scientific and cultural, hints their story did not end there, because soot layers, tool fragments, and burned bones suggest fire still flickered inside the cave until as recently as 12,000 years ago. And local myths speak of the Ibu Gogo, small hairy people who snatched food, mimicked human speech, and vanished into the forest when chased, tales too eerily specific to dismiss as imagination. And the villagers who passed down these stories swear the Ibu Gogo were real, stubborn, clever, and sometimes frightening, like trickster spirits who survived at the fringes of human territory. Could it be that Homo floresiensis remained alive while the world began constructing its first civilizations, still moving in the darkness while we humans looked up at the stars, unaware that another version of us was creeping beneath our feet? If they survived that long, perhaps they survived longer still, hiding from expanding humans, retreating into caverns deeper than we dare to follow, evolving further into secrecy. Evolutionary theory calls it island dwarfism, but that label does nothing to explain the ingenuity carved into every tool they left behind. Nor does it account for the mythic consistency of the islanders' testimonies, which say the little people did not disappear because they died, but because they were driven into hiding, suppressed by fear and conflict when the tall newcomers arrived, our ancestors, who always seemed to erase or absorb anything that challenged their dominance. Yet even in disappearance, the hobbits leave behind riddles, like who they truly were. Were they advanced for their size, or remnants of a far older lineage clinging to existence while the world changed around them? Their wrists and feet resemble Lucy's, the famous Australopithecine from over 3 million years ago, suggesting ancient origins, yet their tools and behaviors resemble modern survival strategies, a bizarre mix that makes them both primitive and surprisingly capable. Their isolation is both curse and advantage. No knowledge shared from other human groups, no enemies greater than native predators, until the inevitable arrival of Homo sapiens, creatures taller, faster in thought, armed with complex languages and ever-adapting strategies, who likely viewed the hobbits with a blend of fear, curiosity, and territorial instinct, a combination that rarely ends well for the neighbor who is smaller. And here lies a deeper theme, a recurring pattern in the human saga. Wherever different human species crossed paths, the outcome was never equal coexistence, but a slow erasure of one by the other, sometimes through violence, sometimes through love and interbreeding, sometimes through competition for land, but always resulting in the shrinking of diversity until only one remained: us. And when sapiens took Flores, the hobbits' time may have run out. Yet their disappearance is still too recent, too suspicious, leaving an open question that scientists struggle to dismiss. What if some of them lingered beyond the archaeological timestamp, hiding in places we haven't yet uncovered? Small shapes moving among roots and shadows, their presence sensed only by those who still believe the stories. Because forests remember what humans forget, and fires leave marks even when bones do not. And caves hold their secrets tight until someone brave enough digs deeper. Liang Bua still has untouched chambers, blocked by rock falls and tight passages leading further underground, spaces no excavator has reached, spaces where one day a full skeleton, maybe even a preserved body, might be waiting to stun the world again. And so, as we search for answers on Flores, another mystery calls from a different continent entirely. A cave so narrow, explorers must crawl through darkness and stone just to reach what lay hidden inside. A cave whose depths reveal a human species with small brains, but complex hearts, performing rituals once believed exclusive to us, proving intelligence has never worn a single shape.
Beneath the sun-baked plains of South Africa, under layers of ancient limestone carved by time and darkness, lies a world no light touches, a labyrinth of narrow tunnels twisting into the earth like veins of a buried beast. And inside these suffocating passages, archaeologists discovered something humanity was never prepared to accept. Another kind of us, small but not simple, quiet but not primitive, a species whose bones rest deeper than fear itself, and whose behavior forces us to question what makes a human truly human. The story begins in the Rising Star cave system of the cradle of humankind, a name that feels poetic until you crawl through openings barely wider than your shoulders and squeeze into the Chamber of Stars, a chamber that has not seen daylight in hundreds of thousands of years, yet cradled an entire hidden population of Homo naledi, a species our textbooks once swore could not exist, because everything about them defies the rules we wrote for evolution. Picture one of them alive, standing just a little over 5 feet tall, with long arms built for climbing, fingers curved like hooks for gripping rock, a gaze both familiar and unsettling, and a skull that holds a brain shockingly small, barely a third of ours. Yet the fire within those eyes is intelligent, aware, determined. As if evolution chose efficiency over size, building a mind streamlined for survival rather than excess. And the most haunting truth is this: they walked the earth at the same time we did. Not millions of years before us, but perhaps as recently as 230,000 years ago. Maybe even less. Neighbors in time that we never knew existed until the bones began to whisper from the dark. The chamber where they were found is not a place the dead accidentally fell into, not a pit where animals dragged bones, nor a shelter carved by nature for random burial, but a location so hidden, so difficult to reach, that scientists themselves nearly suffocated trying to follow the path, crawling on their bellies through blackness, scraping skin, feeling the rock squeeze like a predator's jaws. And yet, this journey was made again and again by beings with brains the size of a child's, carrying their dead intentionally, releasing them into a ritual space that no predator ever visited, no flood ever disturbed, a room of silence chosen for reasons we still cannot name. Imagine the scene: a mother carrying the lifeless body of her child through twisting tunnels, breathing shallowly in the stale, choking air, guided only by memory and instinct, not abandoning her young to scavengers, but laying them among ancestors, perhaps whispering a final sound, a goodbye, a hope that death was not the end. Because burial without survival instinct is illogical, a waste of energy, an act of meaning, and meaning is the core of humanity. Did Homo naledi believe in something after death? Did they feel grief, love, fear of losing one another? Their bones do not speak words, but their actions do, and they scream that intelligence is not measured in cubic centimeters. The tools found near some remains suggest they shaped stone, perhaps used fire, perhaps left markings behind, hints that these small-brained humans solved problems, planned journeys, cooperated in dangerous environments, and treated death with reverence, while we, in our arrogance, once insisted only Homo sapiens could do these things. The Rising Star Cave is a tomb, but it is also a revelation, a mirror held to our assumptions that says, the story of human intelligence is not linear, nor exclusive, nor clean. Homo naledi were survivors, adapted to darkness, navigating the underworld like ghosts seamlessly moving through cracks and shadows, their lives unfolding in the tension between hunger and hope, between climbing and falling, between life's fragile spark and death's cold permanence. Perhaps their choice of burial chamber was strategic as well as spiritual, deep enough to protect bodies from predators, yet dangerous enough that only the determined could enter, creating a sanctuary for the lost, a mark of cognition and culture that forces scientists to redefine what it means to have a mind. But as researchers mapped the bones littering the chamber floor, over 1,500 pieces belonging to dozens of individuals, from infants to elders, a chilling question surfaced. Why so many dead here? Was this tradition or tragedy? Did these beings meet their end because shrinking populations pushed them underground, hiding from larger, more aggressive creatures, perhaps even us? If Homo naledi survived alongside Homo sapiens, then history repeats its cruel theme. Where two humans walk, only one leaves a legacy written in monuments and cities, while the other fades into rumor and bones. The caves protected them for a while, long enough to form a culture that transcended survival, but progress above ground moved faster, spreading fire and language and weapons that reshaped the earth, until every corner where other humans lived became contested ground. And in that contest, sapiens always emerged victorious, knowingly or unknowingly, bearing the diversity of our own family. But deep underground, in Rising Star, the naledi spirits linger, figures built for darkness, hands resting forever near sharp stones, an evolutionary branch that might have led to a different kind of civilization had they been allowed time to grow, to expand their knowledge, to chase the sun instead of hiding beneath it. Modern scientists stand in that chamber trembling not from claustrophobia or skeletal reminders of death, but from the philosophical shock that a species with such small brains could understand mortality, identity, belonging, and reverence, forcing us to face a terrifying possibility. Intelligence is not what makes us unique, only our survival is. And survival is messy, brutal, and unforgiving. meaning there may have been a moment when the naledi and sapiens' eyes met in firelight somewhere above the cave's entrance. Two humans staring at each other with competing futures hanging in the balance, until fear or necessity drove one into the shadows and the other into the future. And what if in some hidden pockets of Earth, naledi remained alive longer than we think, retreating deeper as sapiens conquered the land, their world shrinking but not extinguished, their rituals continuing in silence, their bodies adapting further to darkness, their minds becoming something we cannot measure, waiting in the unseen places beneath continents, leaving only hints behind, a tiny carving, a strangely placed bone, a footprint where no modern human has stepped. Rising Star is only one cave, one story uncovered out of millions of possible burial sites around the world. A single spark revealing an entire forgotten chapter of the human book. A reminder that our species is the survivor, not the standard. And the greatest horror is not what we find in the darkness, but what the darkness remembers about us. Because in that cave, the bones whisper many endings. The end of coexistence, the end of lineage, the end of being known. But also, the end of the world as naledi hoped it would be. As we climb back toward the light, away from hollow skulls whose jaws seem frozen and silent warnings, we carry with us an unanswered question that grips the heart like a cold hand. What killed them? What was the final push that sealed their fate? Was it famine? Was it disease? Was it simply that Homo sapiens arrived, and history shows what happens next whenever we arrive? And that question leads us directly into the next chapter of this dark human legacy, where we unravel not one extinction, but a pattern of strategic disappearances, a chain of rival species erased until only one remained. And the deeper we investigate, the more we will realize that the death of Homo naledi is only a single clue in a far larger mystery. What kills a human species?
They were once our rivals, neighbors, even lovers. But in the end, every one of our forgotten cousins faced the same shadow slowly tightening around their throats. Extinction. A fate written not in a single moment, but in a relentless sequence of betrayals by the Earth itself, by biology, and above all, by us. Climates shifted violently. Glaciers surged forward, consuming valleys like crushing jaws. Droughts burned the land until berries and water vanished. And small populations of Neanderthals, Denisovans, naledi, and other now unnamed human branches collapsed inward under the suffocating weight of isolation. Each birth a gamble, each death a catastrophe, while diseases found easy purchase in thinning groups lacking immunity to pathogens carried by wandering Homo sapiens, whose expanding populations turned sickness into a silent weapon. And still, even where survival was possible, we made sure it was no longer shared, because competition for the same caves, the same mammoths, the same rivers sharpened into conflict where spear met bone and fire drove family screaming into the dark. But the greatest violence was not the battles we remember in stories, but the simpler, quieter one, replacement. Because our ancestors were fertile with heirs, our babies more numerous, our tribes better connected, and so time itself became our blade. Every child born of us and them was counted as us, every generation diluting memories of those who stood beside us, until they were no longer enemies, nor allies, nor anything at all. Just whispers in the night telling myths of monsters shaped like men while their bones crumbled in dirt. And even in the places they seemed strongest, like the caves of Europe where Neanderthals mastered survival for 200,000 years, we arrived with something more dangerous than strength. Networks, alliances, art, shared information that let us adapt faster than disaster could kill us. Because while they faced a cold snap with the same tools they had used for ages, we invented new ones. While they sheltered in familiar caves, we crossed oceans and marched over mountains. Our curiosity weaponized into conquest, and evolution, blind, uncaring, place its final bet on the ones who would never stop expanding, never stop consuming, never stop wanting more than the world could give. So the last Neanderthal did not fall with a heroic scream, but with a final breath, alone in the forest, unaware it was the end of an entire kind. Just as the last Denisovan child perhaps died of a simple infection, just as the last naledi vanished deep below the ground, and now their entire histories, their triumphs, their loves, their discoveries exist only as fragments in our veins, reminders of a million-year family that ended with a massacre disguised as progress. And the bitter twist is this: those extinctions were not accidents of survival. They were the first warning signs that Homo sapiens is a species that does not coexist. We consume, we absorb, we erase. And as we stare back into the abyss of our ancestry, seeing how thoroughly a human species can disappear, a darker question begins to rise through the soil, cold and slow, asking, if evolution chose us because we destroy our rivals so efficiently, then what happens when there is only us left and nowhere left to push the danger but inward? Because the story isn't finished, and in our blood hides the legacy of those we outlived, waiting to awaken in the next chapter, the legacy in our DNA.
Even after their voices fell silent, after their tools rusted into dust and their footprints were swallowed by shifting earth, the other humans did not truly disappear, because every living person today carries echoes of their survival strategies and their final screams hidden inside ourselves, coded reminders of battles they fought so we could win life in their place. And though the world believes humanity stands alone now, the truth is we are never alone. Not in blood, not in memory, not in the ghostly architecture of our genetics, where 1 to 2% of your DNA may belong to Neanderthals, who once stood shoulder to shoulder with enormous mammoths beneath icy moons, and up to 5% in some populations belongs to the Denisovans, whose lungs were forged in near-death altitudes where the air could kill others, but elevated them into mountain-born titans. Their legacy shaping Sherpas today, who climb Everest as if it were a simple hill. And even the tiny Flores hobbits and naledi may have left signatures not yet decoded, like locked doors in the human blueprint, guarding evolutionary tricks that once allowed small-bodied humans to thrive in darkness and isolation where we would fail. And as geneticists dig deeper, they keep finding surprises that rewrite everything we thought we knew. A Siberian girl with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. Proof of forbidden unions that created hybrid children with abilities no single species earned alone. Meaning that humanity didn't just conquer, we fused, we absorbed, we became stronger because we were a mosaic of the fallen, inheriting immune defenses from Neanderthals to fight ancient diseases, inheriting Denisovan oxygen processing genes to explore the edge of the sky, inheriting instincts, fears, strengths that evolved in worlds we've never seen. And suddenly the question shifts from why did they vanish to something far more unsettling. How much of them still lives inside us? Because beneath our modern skin and our cities and screens, the ancient code still whispers and sometimes erupts in ways we don't understand. Aggression that feels older than civilization. Anxiety that spikes in the dark when our eyes search trees for predators that no longer exist. Obsessions with fire, with tools, with dominance itself. All reactions shaped by species who spent nights clutching spears under unfamiliar stars. And if we are the product of everything eliminated before us, then every lost human species is still here, buried in the marrow, hiding behind our smiles, shaping the very concept of human. And so the final twist is that extinction gave them immortality. And yet, there remains an even more haunting possibility explored by archaeologists staring at fresh-dug bones and unexplained footprints. What if some cousins didn't die out at all? What if the shadows of the forest still protect a pair of eyes not quite like ours? What if legends, calling them wild men, are the last scraps of truth refusing to disappear? Because after discovering 3 new human species in just the last 2 decades,
What else might be waiting under the next cave stone or untouched jungle floor? And if they are found alive, the greatest question of all will return like a chilling echo from the Paleolithic. Can our species ever truly share the world with another? But before we search the forest for survivors, we must go back to where we first walked as hybrids of the conquered, back to when humans learned not only to endure the Earth's wrath, but to reshape the Earth itself. The dawn of a dangerous power that would determine who rises next in human evolution.
If we found 3 lost human species in the last 20 years, how many more wait beneath the Earth? How many stories still lie locked in caves, beneath jungles, frozen under ancient ice? Bones that remember a world before us. Our origins are not finished. History is not complete. And the deepest secrets of humanity have only just begun to surface. Because just beyond the bones of forgotten humans stand monuments built by hands we cannot explain. Stone temples older than the pyramids, cities erased by time, civilizations that vanish without a trace, yet left behind structures we still cannot build today. Next time, we follow those impossible ruins. We search for the missing chapters of human achievement, from Göbekli Tepe to the lost city beneath the sea, to temples that shouldn't exist at all. They weren't supposed to be here, and neither were we.